psalm of praise, the second reading from the book of Colossians. O come, let us sing to the Lord. Let us make a joyful noise to the rock of our salvation. Let us come into his presence with thanksgiving. Let us make a joyful noise to him with songs of praise. For the Lord is a great God and a great King above all gods. In his hand are the depths of the earth. The heights of the mountains are also his. The sea is his, for he made it, and the dry land which his hands have formed. And now from Colossians. And let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts, to which indeed you were called in the one body, and be thankful. Let the word of Christ dwell in you richly. Teach and admonish one another in all wisdom, and with gratitude in your hearts sing psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs to God. And whatever you do, in word or deed, do everything in the name of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks to God the Father through him. The word of God for the people of God. Well, I'm going to call him out, but Sam Holmes has done it again. Have you noticed what a great job he does choosing hymns that reinforce the theme of worship? Last week, I thought particularly spectacular. And here we are on the brink of the Thanksgiving holiday. I'm preaching on giving thanks, and he has sprinkled our worship with songs of gratitude and praise. Come, ye thankful people, come. Now thank we all our God. Cal is about to play, during communion, Cal is going to play Now Thank We All Our God in 4 different variations of that hymn. All of this working together. And it makes sense because if ever there was a Sunday to offer praise, this is it, when we have set aside a week for our collective gratitude. To give thanks to God. To just stop for a while. All the toil and committees and to-do lists and assignments, and just sit in the presence of God's love, take a bench, look up into the blue sky and breathe, and give thanks to the God who provides and who cares. When we do this, when we sing these songs of praise and worship, we're reaching back into an ancient worship tradition. Our Hebrew ancestors sang Thanksgiving hymns too. The psalm that I read a little while ago was probably a song for worship. A lot of the psalms in the Psalter were hymns that were offered in worship. I guess we could have sung it instead of reading it, but the ancestors didn't pass down the sheet music, just the words, so we read it. But here's part of what we read together. Oh, come, let us sing to the Lord. Let us make a joyful noise to the rock of our salvation. Let us come into his presence with thanksgiving. Let us make a joyful noise to him with songs of praise. We have inherited this biblical tradition of offering praise. But of course, I'm blending that today with our American tradition too. It just seemed fitting that we, the week of Thanksgiving, would just take time to give thanks, right? But preaching on Thanksgiving is harder than it seems. It is becoming an increasingly challenging theme. Not because cranberry sauce costs more, not because hard partisan politics has driven a wedge, not because people have become generally ungrateful. The reason Thanksgiving is harder than ever to preach is that increasingly our culture doesn't know where to offer thanks. Most of the country will gather this Thursday around family tables to give thanks. But more and more of those families do not believe in God. How does a culture offer thanks to God when they no longer believe in God? There's a thank you letter written and no address. So increasingly, we're living in a place where the God we worship today is not regarded by the culture. 2 years ago, I read a book that took me almost 2 years to read. It was one of those books that was about the size of an ottoman and densely written, and I don't usually read heavy stuff like that, but it was all the buzz, and so people were writing books in response to this book. Big deal. So I slogged through. Canadian philosophy professor Charles Taylor wrote a book called A Secular Age. Now, I'm going to try to condense that thing into a paragraph. But this is the gist of his argument and his research. Taylor says that we're living in the first era of human existence where the cultural default position is that there is no God. Earlier cultures, and we see this in the Bible, earlier cultures were competing that their God was the God, but every culture was worshiping some expression of a higher power. Right? We've got expressions of worship in hieroglyphics. Every culture, every language. In fact, there's some of that in the hymn I read earlier. There's a line that says, "For the Lord is a great God and a great King above all gods." We've got the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob pitted against the Baals and the idols and the worship of other deities. But everybody, generally everybody, was working with the assumption that there is some divine mystery, or as Taylor calls it, an enchanted reality. For all of human history, the default position in every culture has been some form of worship, however they defined the divine mystery. But Taylor's alarming research concludes that in the modern era, most people believe in nothing beyond here and now. Andrew Root is one of the guys who wrote a response to Taylor's book, and he says, "We have arrived at a secular age, not because people no longer see it as necessary to go to church and are willing to mark none on a survey, but rather because the very idea that there could be a personal God who orders and acts in the cosmos has become unbelievable, or at least contested." Or we could say that we simply live in a world where it is quite easy to forget, deny, or simply not care that there is a transcendent dimension to reality. Now that's frightening at a lot of levels. But I'm back to my original question. How does a culture do Thanksgiving when there's no one to thank? All right, so I have a kind of tree falls in the woods kind of question. Hang with me on this one. Does a gift require a giver? I'm going to go with yes. So I'm a little bit of a language nerd, but consider this. In the next few weeks, going from now to Christmas, we'll start talking about the gifts under the tree. Look how many gifts are under the tree. Are all those gifts going to go in the back of the Camry? But those aren't gifts. Those are packages. They're not gifts until they're given, right? A gift requires a giver. So maybe that's the challenge of many people at Thanksgiving. Where do we direct our gratitude if there's not a belief in God? Gifts all around and no giver? So, this is how many people will celebrate Thanksgiving this week. All the family will gather around the table and the candles lit, green bean casserole. And they won't give thanks to God, but instead offer thanks as a celebration of our own human flourishing. Self-congratulations. I am thankful for the spouse I chose, for the house we can afford, for the level of fitness I have achieved, for the comfort of my sedan that I ride in to go see my stockbroker. That is not giving thanks. That is self-congratulations. Listen to how different that sounds from what the psalmist said. Oh, come, let us sing to the Lord. Let us make a joyful noise to the rock of our salvation. Let us come into his presence with thanksgiving. Let us make a joyful noise to him with songs of praise. Thanksgiving is an acknowledgment of grace. It's recognizing what is beyond our earning. Thanksgiving is not about our achievement and our accumulation. It's turning our hearts toward heaven in gleaming gratitude for all that we have not deserved. Grace. The drippings of grace is what C.S. Lewis calls it when we awaken to our inner longing for, and I'm quoting Lewis, a scent of a flower we have not found, the echo of a tune we have not heard, news from a country we have not yet visited. The biblical witness is full of thanksgiving. Believers who stop their busyness to look to heaven and say, a compassionate and gracious God, slow to anger, abounding in love and faithfulness. And it's always pointed to God. Listen to the emphasis in just these two verses. Let us come into his presence with thanksgiving. Let us make a joyful noise to him with songs of praise. For the Lord is a great God and a great King above all gods. In his hand are the depths of the earth. The heights of the mountains are also his. Thanksgiving is always pointed to God. Gratitude is always an awareness of grace. Grace that we did not earn, did not accomplish. The grace we know when we sit at the seashore and listen to it pound and know there's a great mystery beyond us. When we look out, some of you across your deck into the grandeur of these mountains. And the psalmist reminds us that you and I weren't much involved in any of that. Grace is God's love that beams our way not because of who we are, but despite who we are. Grace is the love that reached down and saved us from our own rotting selfishness and continues to save us. Grace is being found and exposed and loved anyway. Grace is the abundance of God that is present in every breath, every hug, every note of laughter. Grace is never accomplished, never achieved. It is only gifted, and grace requires a giver. Every gift requires a giver. Part of our other reading from Colossians says, let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts, to which indeed you were called in the one body, and be thankful. Gratitude is an awareness of grace. It leads to peace and wisdom and singing. Gratitude and grace actually share a language history. Those two words have the same root word. Celebration of our accomplishments and accumulation is pride. Gratitude is acknowledging God's favor that comes our way without our bidding or deserving. God's showering of goodness found under every rock and behind every tree, if only we knew how to look for it. Last Saturday, Melissa and I made a trip into the city. We went to Doraville, the town we grew up in, for the 75th anniversary of the church where we met and grew up, First Baptist Doraville. That's the church we got married in. It's the church where I was ordained. It carries a lot of meaning for us. Thankfully, they did the 75th anniversary on Saturday, recognizing that a lot of people who wanted to come would be busy on Sunday. So we got together and relived a lot of memories. And one of those memories that popped up for me was the Thanksgiving sermon my pastor gave every single year. Bill Doverspike was our pastor. Every year, at this Sunday before Thanksgiving, he preached basically the same sermon, maybe a little different each time. But it wasn't actually a sermon, it was a list. He just made a list of things he was thankful for. And the list would be all over the place. It was little stuff, big stuff. It would go from almonds to absolution, from hymnals to hydrangeas. I mean, it was just all over the place. But I always looked forward to it. There was no explanation. There was no discourse on it, just a list. He'd say, I'm thankful for hand-holding with my wife, Nell. I'm thankful for classical music. I'm thankful for sleeping grandchildren. Yeah. I'm thankful for God's salvation. I'm thankful for number one pencils. I'm thankful for mowed grass. For some reason, number one pencils made it every year. I don't know why. But I thought that wouldn't be a bad way for any of us to spend Thanksgiving this year. So let me offer this challenge. Maybe one of these coming days when you're on a long road trip or got one of those sleep-in mornings, maybe you could think of 20 minutes worth of unearned joys, a list of undeserved gifts that came straight from God's love, not from your hard work, straight from the heart of God, because every gift requires a giver. I'll help you get your list started, because one of those gifts, of course, is symbolized at this table. For God so loved the world that he gave. Our gratitude for the life and death and resurrection of Jesus is the beginning point for all of our gratitude. Once we know the forgiveness and liberation of this table, we are set on a journey to find other ways that God is at work in the world. And we get in kind of a cycle of that. Awareness of God's work in the world generates gratitude, and the more we live with gratitude, the more we are aware of what God is doing in the world. And somehow in all of that, we start to embody Thanksgiving as a habit and not a holiday. We look everywhere for signs of God's grace and point to it, speak about it, and recognize that it is God's shining favor all around. The poet W.H. Auden writes, I know nothing except that what everyone knows, that if there when grace dances, I should dance. I hope you'll find ways this week to dance in the abundance of God's showered grace, to dance in the freedom that it's not all up to you, to dance in the implications of forgiveness, to dance and splash in the puddles of God's provision and abundance, to dance in the assurance that you are loved, because when grace dances, you should dance too.